Hello everybody, my name is Annie Gibbons. I'm the CEO of Glaucoma Australia. I did get lost on the way, so if you did as well, don't feel worried about that. It was a tricky location, but we found it and we're all here and it's going to be a great event. We're very, very blessed today to have our first Congenital Glaucoma meeting. So I know many of you have started meeting and connecting on our Facebook group, which has been so exciting to see those relationships developing. You've all got to meet Satna, our educator, and now you're here meeting each other. So I think that this is really quite a big milestone event, I think, for Glaucoma Australia and hopefully for you, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of it. We have three wonderful speakers today. We have Bronwyn and Emmanuelle and Lachlan, and so we're really looking forward to what they have to share with us, and hopefully this will be the first of many events, and so over to you.
Thanks, Annie. Thank you everyone for coming. We've had a chat to a couple of people who come in the door. So, my name is Bronwyn. I'm the Registry Coordinator of the Australian and New Zealand Registry of Advanced Glaucoma. We call ourselves the ANZRAG for short because it is such a mouthful. So who are we? The registry started in 2007 with the aim to provide the world's largest collection of advanced glaucoma cases. We collect clinical information and DNA, and our aim is to generate new ways of detecting who's at risk of developing glaucoma. We did start focusing on the most severe cases of glaucoma, the advanced cases of glaucoma, but now the registry has expanded to include anyone who has a diagnosis of glaucoma. We already know a lot about glaucoma. We know that the damage is irreversible. We know that intraocular pressure is not used now for diagnostic purposes, but is a risk factor for glaucoma, and that people whose pressures don't get very high can still get glaucoma. We know it's largely hereditary and that it may present as asymptomatic, hence it gets called a silent thief of sight, and also that some cases will progress despite aggressive treatment. We're trying to find the answers to all these parts of the puzzle. I'll use any excuse to put in an ice hockey picture. Our best defence for glaucoma, early detection and early intervention. So if we can pinpoint who's most at risk of getting glaucoma early, monitor them very carefully and get onto it quickly with intervention, we've got more chance of preventing vision loss. So the Glaucoma Registry to date has over 7,000 participants. All these people have provided us with a DNA sample and we have clinical information from their treating specialists. So mostly from Australia and New Zealand, as you can see there, but we also have samples from all over the world, and these are just some of the countries that we have DNA samples from. This is a picture of what most people out there would think glaucoma looks like. So most people seem to think it's an older person's disease. Even if it runs in the family, we find people can be reluctant to get tested too early because they think it's not something they have to worry about until they're older. But we know it can look like this, it can look like that, and it can also look like that. And we have samples in the registry covering all those spectrums from 0 to 100 pretty much. We also know that glaucoma is actually a group of conditions. So it's not just one thing. Primary open-angle glaucoma is the most prevalent type of glaucoma, and that's where the drainage channels are open and people still develop damage to the optic disc. There's angle closure glaucoma, where the drainage channels are narrow or blocked, and that can be an acute situation too, where pressures spike very quickly and it can end up in an emergency situation. We're interested in recruiting all of these conditions that can put people at risk of glaucoma, whether or not the person has glaucoma. The nanophthalmos is when the person has a very small eye, a very short axial length, and that can lead to complications with the pressure and therefore glaucoma. Pseudoexfoliation and pigment dispersion, where tiny particles in the eye can block the drainage channels and therefore affect intraocular pressure. There's a group of people who respond to steroids, which can push their pressure up, and once again that can happen very quickly and turn into an emergency situation. And then we have sort of more developmental ones, including primary congenital glaucoma, which can turn up in very young people in later babies. So we recruit DNA from all these types of glaucoma. For us, childhood glaucoma is anyone diagnosed 18 years and under. At the moment, we have 294 cases in the ANZRAG, which makes up about 4% of our total. So it is rare, and all of our cases are from Australia and New Zealand. We're interested in recruiting people continually into the ANZRAG, and I'll talk about what that involves. We generally get most of our referrals to the ANZRAG from ophthalmologists. They'll fill in one of these forms, which includes a person's personal details, their contact details, and also some clinical information for us to determine where they fit into the study. We also have an app that specialists can use, and they can refer to us using that. But people can also self-refer. So anyone who's interested in taking part in the glaucoma registry can just contact us. And then what we'll do is we'll go back to the ophthalmologist later and get the clinical information at a different time. And what would it be like to be involved? Well, of course, the first thing we'll do is ask for consent. That's consent to take part and also consent to access clinical information. Part of that is we explain to you about the confidentiality as part of the project, including what happens to your DNA sample. We get clinical details from the ophthalmologist who's treating the person involved, and we get a blood collection. Now, we do that through the mail, so that's why we're so good at being Australian and New Zealand wide. We send out a kit with some blood tubes in it to everyone. They take that to a pathology service to have the blood taken, and we provide a reply paid satchel for it to come back to us in Adelaide. There's no cost involved for postage or blood extraction. We'll cover any of those costs. Because our genetics testing is done in an accredited laboratory, there is a process where people who take part in the ANZRAG do get feedback about the genetic work that we do. So I put the picture up there because I think most families have something interesting about them. Some are more interesting than others. Sometimes it's good being an interesting family because you can help solve problems. So anyone who takes part in the registry helps us to develop a better understanding of how glaucoma is inherited, how it progresses, and what it actually looks like. We know the increased risk for people when there's a family history of glaucoma, so the work we're doing looking at the genetic causes of glaucoma will help us work closely with early detection. If you take part in the study, we will do some genetic testing on the person's DNA, and there will be feedback of results through our genetic counsellor. And we can help facilitate genetic counselling to those families who are looking to having further children and are worried about how things are passed on. So primary congenital glaucoma, they're very valuable cases to us. It's rare. There's statistics from in Australia. In some other cultures it can be a higher prevalence and some lower. There's definitely a genetic implication in the condition. We're interested in learning more about it because the intervention has to be, in some cases, very aggressive and can be traumatic. Just going through the diagnosis process can be traumatic as well. And there's the question, we have adults now part of the study who presented as babies with glaucoma, were treated, and then go on to have normal vision, no more intervention. So, do I still have glaucoma? Although we're doing a lot of genetic work, we're also talking to people who have glaucoma, and we're asking them about how they were diagnosed, what it's like for them, and how it's impacted their life. So we've actually learned that with primary congenital glaucoma, unlike other more prevalent types, which are often picked up by an optometrist, that PCG is often picked up more by a GP or an ophthalmologist. So the detection pathway can be different. Some of you might know that there can be visible symptoms or behavioural symptoms to say that there's something wrong with the child. In other types of glaucoma, there's no visible symptoms at all. It can take some time to diagnose, and that's largely because it is rare, and a lot of specialists won't think about it as the first being the cause of the symptoms they're seeing. And we also know that it can be a very stressful time for parents. As I said, we sent out questionnaires and asked people about their stories, and these are just some of the quotes back. They might resonate with you. This lady was saying that her son was screaming and crying. You know, so often there's a lot of distress with the baby. I had stories of babies hitting their head and being told their child has a migraine. So it can be very distressing to see. But it can take some time to be diagnosed. So we've had stories of people being sent away telling them it was something else, so go get treated for something else. And this person, it took 3 months from when they first noticed signs to actually being diagnosed. And we know that the intervention is quite aggressive, so the children can go through a number of operations, plus the examinations under anaesthetic, and that's all quite traumatic for parents. And we want to know more about these stories. So your experience matters to us. We want to learn more about what's going on. We want to understand this type of glaucoma. We want to find better detection pathways so that intervention can happen as early as possible. We want to be able to inform families and let them know they're not alone and let them know what to expect. And we want to improve the support for families. So that's it from me.
And as part of the registry, I coordinate the genetic testing, and whenever we have results, I also contact the families and the individuals to let them know what we found and what it means for them. So in terms of the genetic testing, we have two main aims with our registry. The first one is to characterize a bit better the genes that we already know of. So we try to understand if maybe those genes can be associated with other symptoms, or maybe what type of glaucoma people may develop, or how they respond to treatment, to surgery, so those kind of things. And the more we have people, I guess, with those types of glaucoma, then the more we learn about it. The second aim of our research is to identify new genes. Because there's lots of genes involved with congenital glaucoma, and there's still a lot that we don't know of. So we try to also identify new ones. In terms of the benefits of having a genetic diagnosis, so if we do find something, we try to let people know about it, and that's for many different reasons. The first one is if we find the cause of the glaucoma, then we can tell people, I guess, a bit more information about how it's transmitted or how it's inherited in the family. Which means we can also give some information about whether other family members may be at risk, and if so, who are those family members? Are we talking about parents, siblings, children? Which means we can also provide some information about what would be the risk for future children. And finally, some types of congenital glaucoma can be associated with other symptoms. So if that's the case, and we find that maybe someone has other symptoms or is at risk of having other symptoms, then we can organize referrals to appropriate specialists. So if we're talking about genetics, I thought I'd give you a bit of background information about genes and genetics, just a quick crash course on genetics. So when we talk about genes, so in all the cells of our body we have what we call the chromosomes, and along the chromosomes you have what we call the genes. So we have around 20,000 genes in our body, and each of those genes has an important role or function to play. The genes are made of DNA, which is kind of a code, if you want, that leads to the creation of proteins. And the proteins are going to do the role or the function in your body. So each of those proteins will have a different role, and if some of them are important for the eye and they're not working properly, that's when you can develop some symptoms. So when we look at the different types, I guess, of changes that can happen in a gene, you can have a whole gene that's missing, for example. And so if you don't have your gene, you don't have your protein, it's not supposed to do what it's supposed to do, and so you may end up with some genetic condition here, let's say glaucoma. You can have a part of the gene that's missing, which means you end up with only a part of a protein, and it's also not really good usually at doing what it's supposed to do. You can also have some what we call mutations, which really is just a change in a gene. And that change can impact just a few letters of your DNA, or just one or a few of those. It depends. We often use the analogy of the book, I guess, in genetics. So if you think about it, your chromosomes would be different volumes of an encyclopedia. Your genes would be chapters. And then if you have, for example, a chapter missing, that's usually not good in your book. Or if you have even a single letter in a sentence that's modified, that can change the meaning of your sentence. Which means also that when we do genetic testing, we need to look at all of those things. And quite often the techniques that we use are good to pick up different things. So some techniques are good at picking up maybe some, whether a gene is missing. Some of the techniques are good at looking at some particular genetic changes, or just if some letters are missing, for example. So we use different techniques, and that's why it's also not always easy to find the cause. And so what we do usually as part of the registry, we do different approaches. We often look at the genes that we know of as a start, just because it's easier for us, and we can use some particular genetic testing to look at those genes. So quite often, we would start with the most common gene associated with the type of glaucoma that someone has. So it's quite often on a case-by-case basis. And we can give you some feedback about those results. So if we don't find anything, I would just send a letter to you and the specialist to let you know about the results. And if we do find something, then I would give you a call and explain what it means. Most of the time, we don't find anything in those genes, so we have to look a bit deeper. And so you may have heard about it, but we use other technologies that are often called exome or genome sequencing, where we can look at all of the genes at once. This is a bigger job, and that means we also need some people who are able to actually look at all this data and be able to make some sense out of it. So that usually takes longer, and that's where the research really kicks in, and that can take us years before we have answers. What it means is, so we'll have 2 copies of our genes. You get one from your dad, one from your mom. And in this situation, if you have a particular change on one copy of your gene that makes it non-functional, you don't have any symptoms, because you still have another copy of that gene that's fine. So that's what you call someone who's a carrier. That person doesn't have any symptoms, they don't know about it. We're all carriers of a couple of things, actually, and we just don't know about it. What happens is, if someone meets another person who's also a carrier, and they have children, then depending on the combination of genes, there's a 1 in 4 risk that the child can inherit actually the 2 non-functioning copies from the parents. So that's a 25% risk that the child is affected, and a 75% risk that the child is not affected. That's for each child. So although if you have 4 children, the statistics are that you should have only 1 who's affected. In real life, it can be anything from 1 child to 4 of them. So that's how some of the genetic changes can be transmitted. Now, what if that person decides to have children? What happens then is the risk for their children will depend on whether the other parent is a carrier or not. So if the other parent is not a carrier, all of the children will inherit a non-functioning copy from the parent who's affected, but they will get a copy that's okay from the other parent. So they're all carriers, but they're all unaffected. If the other parent is a carrier, then there's a 50% risk for each child to be affected. So this is how some of the genetic changes can be inherited if they are associated with a gene that's inherited in an autosomal recessive manner. The second type of transmission is called autosomal dominant. So in this situation, if you have a change in a particular gene, that's usually enough to develop some symptoms, meaning that the other copy of your gene is not enough to do the job anymore. And so in this situation, it doesn't matter what the other parent has, the risk for each child is 50% to be affected. Now there's some exceptions to that rule, in the sense that sometimes one of the child is affected and the parents are not affected. It could be because they have glaucoma and they don't know about it. It could be because maybe it's a type of glaucoma where some people will have mild symptoms and some others have more severe symptoms. Or it could just be that one of the parents is not affected but still has this genetic change. So sometimes it can be a bit variable in some families, as we learn about it. The other situation is, although the genetic changes are often transmitted in families, and so you would get them from your parents, your grandparents, their parents before that, at some point in time it also had to start in someone. And so it's possible that the child would have a particular genetic change that just happened with them that's not actually present in any of the parents, which we call, I guess, a new mutation, if you want. If that's the case, then usually for the parents, the risk to have another child who's affected is quite low. So those are the different scenarios, but until we actually know what gene is causing the glaucoma in someone and in the family, it's hard really to give some information about what could be the risk. So just to give you some examples, so the main gene that we know of that's responsible for primary congenital glaucoma is called CYP1B1. In Australia, we would find something in this gene in around 20% of our families. So usually we start by testing for that particular gene. The changes in this gene are transmitted in a recessive manner, which means if both parents are carriers, there's a 25% risk for each child to be affected, and if one parent is affected, then the risk for their children will depend on whether the other parent is a carrier or not. Now, just to give you an idea of the kind of work that we've also done in the past few years, so in 2016, in collaboration with some of the teams in Germany and in the States, we've actually been able to discover a new gene for congenital glaucoma that's called TEC, and we've actually found some changes in the gene in around 5% of our families. We know that changes in this gene are transmitted in a dominant way, so quite often we will see families where there would be someone at each generation who is affected, which are the darker symbols, if you want, here. However, we're still trying to understand a bit more about this gene because there's a number of families that we tested where one of the parents also had the same change, genetic change, but were not affected. So obviously there's still something here that we don't understand, whether we're still missing something in terms of genetics or whether it's just different ways that this gene expresses. So we're still learning about it, but that means it's a bit hard to predict at the moment when we develop glaucoma. So this is fairly recent still. And I thought I would give you one last example because sometimes glaucoma is not just glaucoma, it can be associated with other symptoms. So we have a few families like this. So there is a particular syndrome that's called Axenfeld-Rieger syndrome, where most people will just have symptoms in the eyes and just have the glaucoma, but we know that there's also other people who may have other symptoms, and that's where it becomes important to know about it so we can organize referrals to other specialists. But people who have something in the gene called FOXC1 that's associated with the particular syndrome will have a 50% risk of developing glaucoma. And quite often it starts quite young in children, sometimes it can start a bit later in life, and those changes in this gene are transmitted in a dominant way. So this is something that we are still learning about. We've done a lot of work on this gene in the past few years, and that's how we've been able to understand it a bit better. So those are the three examples that I wanted to show you today. And I guess I'm just going to end on a few things that we're still trying to learn, and Lachlan is going to talk a bit more about it. But we also want to learn, I guess, about the experience that people have with not just the condition, but also how it's diagnosed. And one thing I'm particularly interested in is also if people actually have access to genetic testing. Have they been referred to a genetic service? Has anyone talked to them about whether there could be any risk for anyone else in the family? And if not, and if that's not the case, how can we actually improve that? So those are the kind of things that we're also doing as part of the research.
All right, so my name's Lachlan, and I'm an orthoptist as well, much like Sakna, who you probably already know anyway. But I started just last year to do a PhD in childhood glaucoma, so I guess some people say I'm a sucker for punishment, but I thought there was work to be done, so I'd do it. A little bit more about me. I specialise in paediatric orthoptist, so over the past few years I've worked across Adelaide in both public and private sectors with kids essentially and testing their eyes. So I have met a lot of families affected by childhood glaucoma, and as you know, you do have to attend a lot of appointments, so I've come to know, I guess, some of the struggles and I guess the difficulty, sometimes not difficulty, but managing the condition as well. And I just wanted to help out a little bit more and do more work in that space. So what is childhood glaucoma? And we're all guilty of Googling. So essentially childhood glaucoma itself is an umbrella term, and I have to emphasise that because there are so many separate categories of childhood glaucoma that it can get a little bit confusing. So I guess simply here, childhood glaucoma refers to anyone who has been diagnosed with glaucoma under the age of 18. Primary congenital glaucoma is a diagnosis under 4 years of age. Juvenile open-angle glaucoma is a diagnosis of 4 to 40. And then you've got primary open-angle glaucoma, which is your adults with the onset of 40 and above. Sometimes, though, the glaucoma is associated with other eye features, and that's where the name of the glaucoma can change, or it becomes a syndrome, perhaps. And it's the same, such as Emmanuelle mentioned, with the Axenfeld-Rieger syndrome, and it can be associated with other body features. So we have to look outside of just glaucoma. We look at other features within the eye and other features within the body to properly diagnose the type of glaucoma it is. So essentially, no two eyes are the same, no two people are the same, and no two experiences are the same. So glaucoma in the plumbing system, we've probably already all heard this analogy, but it is a problem with the fluid drainage. And just digging a little bit deeper, I like to think of it like a kitchen sink. And going even further deeper, you can see how complex the pipes are and the drains. Now, I'm not a Bunnings guru, I'm not DIY handy at all, but the structures within the eye and the plumbing system is a very complex area. So what we're trying to look into, essentially, is how that drain is built, or how the plumbing system operates. And it could be something as simple as, say, a pea blocks the kitchen sink, or there's rice stuck in there. But we're looking as deep as, are the plumbing or the pipes, are they too small, are they not built quite right? Or is the drain just not the right fit? And we know, when there is a disruption to anything in the plumbing system, that's where we get the pressure spikes. And what we want to know is how it's all built. So that's looking at the genetics. So where do we start? And as with any area in medicine, it starts with mice studies, and the mice studies have told us which genes already have been found responsible for building this plumbing system. As Emmanuelle said, we don't actually have answers for everybody. And so there's still about 60-odd% where we need to find out what the gene is, find out how the glaucoma works. And that's how we do it, is by collecting your clinical details and your DNA. So glaucoma and the rest of the body. So this is where it really becomes a puzzle. As we're dealing with genes, we have to think of the body as a whole, and we do know that sometimes perhaps the genetics are associated with the development of the face as well. So we're looking outside just the eye. And as with the FOXC1 or the Axenfeld-Rieger, we do know there are facial features involved. What we don't know, though, is there any other answers hiding in the rest of the body? Are there systems developing right? Are the organs developing right? And we don't know yet, but these are the sort of questions we want to ask. It could be something as simple as, say, the height of your child's different to everybody else, or the length of their arms is different, or their weight. It's very confusing, but we're trying to pinpoint, or not necessarily pinpoint, but keep it broad enough that if everybody is found to have the same thing, then perhaps there is a link. And we have to really think of glaucoma, or PCG, like a puzzle. Every little bit of information helps us get closer to finding the answers. And that information is going to come from mum and dad. So we're going to start asking the questions of, are you seeing your doctors for anything else? And you might think it doesn't matter, or you might have a little bump on your ear that's always been there, but something so small might have the key to what we need. And we obviously do this all through the ANZRAG, so that's what Bronwyn spoke about before. So we are collecting your clinical details for genetic information, and then we'll be asking about the rest of the body. But moving on to, say, a sub-study within the ANZRAG, and this is what my PhD is looking at as well, but what happens outside the clinic room? Now, we've all seen Probably Modern Family, but we know that life's busy. Life can be crazy, and then throw on childhood glaucoma on top, and life gets more interesting. What we do want to find out, though, is what is the experience like? And we want to find this out from the angle of the child, but also as an adult who lived or grew up with childhood glaucoma. We want to know your story as well. We also want to know the story of the parent or the primary caregiver, because they influence their child's healthcare decisions as well, and we want to look at the family as a whole entity and what your supports are. And this support as well, we're looking at what's called the psychosocial impact, which is essentially the fancy word for the interaction of psychological and social factors that influence your physical and mental well-being and how you function day to day. So why do we want to know? Now, we can always do better, and I know many of you probably have had great ophthalmologists and orthoptists, optometrists in your care, and I know a lot of them, so I'm biased, and I know they're all great. But I think as a healthcare industry, we need to find out what your needs are, and we need to address them properly. And we want to give you that voice and advocate for your needs. And like I said, you might have found that all your needs are met, but if you find that maybe it wasn't, then we want to know, and we want to help. What they say is strength in numbers, and we have to turn the heads of head honchos in the research, medical, education, governments. You know, we need everybody to turn their heads towards this condition, and that's why we need you. And we don't just say strength in numbers, but strength in information as well. You know, everyone's got such an individual story, and every piece of that puzzle as well will create a really big impact, and we want to know about that. So what do we want to know about? And I don't want to say everything, but essentially everything from the beginning up until now. Now, each of you in this room is obviously at a very different stage of your glaucoma journey, so we kind of want to put a little bit more emphasis or try and stage it out. So we want to know what your experience is like when you were first diagnosed or your child was diagnosed. And you know, understandably, when your child is told that, or when you're told that your child has something, you know, your world might feel like it's changing around you. And we want to know what your experience, what your thoughts, emotions, what your supports were at that time. So when the next family goes through that circumstance as well, we can use your experience as a guide to help them better as well. What we want to know is how you feel at eye appointments. And now, I guess when you've taken a child through, you know how tricky it is to even get a pressure measurement out of the child. And perhaps it can be so tricky sometimes that your child needs to be put to sleep to have a good look inside the eye. And even then, when your child's put to sleep, a whole lot of other emotions go through you. So, because you do go through that again and again and again, we want to know, does it get easier? Does it get harder? Are some things different? Can we make it easier? And that itself is a big area. We want to know about your family life. Now, again, alluding to that support as well, but perhaps you didn't decide to have further children because you've had a child with glaucoma. Perhaps grandma's moved in to help around the house. We want to know this sort of stuff as well. And then looking at your coping mechanisms as a whole. We also want to know about your other supports. Now, obviously, you've all connected with Glaucoma Australia, which is fantastic, but we want to know what drove you to join that, or how did you actually come to find it, or, you know, we know it's a rare condition, and thank you, Deborah, up the back for bringing them together. And then we want to look at the child's experience as well. So we actually have approval in place to interview children aged 8 and above because they've got a story to tell as well. And what we're finding, or what research in other areas of childhood conditions, whether it be diabetes or other disabilities, we're finding perhaps, you know, parents and children, they're saying different things. And that's all to do with, you know, kids don't understand absolutely everything, and they have different experiences or priorities, should we say. So they might just be worried about playing on the slide at school, whereas the parents worrying about the bigger picture or the future. You know, what about high school? What about uni? What about a job? What about driving? Or their relationships in the future? But like I said before, A family is a whole lot of people, and we want to get each story. So how do we get involved? Just to recap again, sign up to the ANZRAG. That's the genetic and clinical study information. So you do have to sign the consent and have your blood taken. Then if you want to be enrolled in an interview study, it is a separate process. And we've had to make it separate just because it is, well, essentially it's a completely different area of research, but within the glaucoma world. And you do have to separately consent to that. And we know the research world's full of a lot of paperwork, but we really do need to have you show us that you understand what you're getting involved in and why. If you choose to do this part of the study, it will be a phone interview, because I don't believe anybody's in Adelaide in this room. So it'll be a phone interview around about 45 minutes to an hour long. So if you are interested in that, come have a chat with one of us and we can definitely get that set up. With the phone interview as well, or interviews just as a whole aren't for everybody. You know, these interviews can bring up some hard questions, some hard emotions that you don't want to have to feel again, and that's completely okay. If you do the interview as well, you don't have to answer every question. You can just say, I'm not comfortable answering that, or skip it, whatever. We don't need to know exactly why you want to skip it. We respect your decisions in every way. But obviously, whatever you choose to tell us or what you feel comfortable sharing will help us and help you and help the next family. What do we do with your information? As with the clinical and genetic data, we will analyse that, looking for patterns, looking for links, trying to find out how that plumbing system is built. With the interviews, they are audio recorded, and then we go through them with a fine-tooth comb to look for similarities and differences in parents and children's experiences, and try to link up or find a reason as to why. What we want to do with that information is create a questionnaire that can be used in clinics. So I'm not sure of each of your experiences, but sometimes clinics are busy and you don't get to say all that you need to say at that appointment. With a questionnaire, it's nice and quick, but it can capture or be a way to alert your eye doctor that, hey, I'm struggling, I need some extra support. And this questionnaire will hopefully identify that, or just open up a conversation for that. And this questionnaire will be for the adults or the parents, and there will be a questionnaire for children as well, so they can get their view across as well. With that, we do keep everything confidential. So, as with any research project, nothing's directly linked to your name, anything, or if you make a statement or in your interviews and we find that it's something that creates a ripple effect, then your name's never attached to it, unless of course you want us to use your name, but as a whole with the research world, nothing's identified or linked back to you.